This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
Hello, podcast fans. This is Jason Burnett from the Archie Bray Foundation. I'm here with two of this year's auction artists, Brooks Oliver and Dita Merritt, to tell you about our upcoming annual auction and fundraiser.
Over 100 artists have donated their work to help us raise money to support the Bray's programming, including the residency program, galleries and exhibitions, the Brickyard Network, and our facilities and grounds to help us beautify campus and make it more accessible.
The auction opens online July 19th and runs until July 26th. To view all the exceptional artwork available, to register, to place bids, and to support the Bray, visit us at givergy.us/2024 Bray Auction. Every purchase helps the Bray become more accessible on campus and online.
Make sure to register today.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 519 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I'm talking with Rebecca and Scott Proctor, who formed Nom Ceramics in 2019 after years of working together in the same studio. Their functional and sculptural collaborations are glazed with layers of pattern that melt together in their soda kiln firings. In this interview, we talk about their path to collaboration, their method for building complex glazed surfaces, and how they balance parenting with studio work. They have an exhibition up right now at the Companion Gallery in Humboldt, Tennessee. You can check that out at companiongallery.com. And also, in addition to their studio work, they run the East Side Pod Shop, which is a community studio in Austin, Texas, that we also talk about in this interview. If you'd like to find out more, you can follow them on Instagram at Nom Ceramics, as well as their website, which is nomceramics.com. Before we get to that interview, I wanted to thank the folks that have recently donated to our fund drive. We are listener supported, so I'd like to thank Laura Martin and Karen Logash for their recent contributions. If you'd like to get involved yourself, you can do that at talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. I'm going to start just by having y'all introduce yourselves so that the listener can get your voice with your name.
Hey y'all, my name's Scott Proctor. I'm a artist and educator living outside of Austin, Texas, in Elgin, Texas. I am a husband and a father and a pottery business owner.
And I'm Rebecca Proctor, Scott's wife. I co-own East Side Pot Shop with Scott in Austin, Texas. We formed Nom Ceramics together, a ceramics practice that we operate out of our home studio in Elgin, Texas.
Are y'all from Texas? Like, how did you end up in the Austin area?
Well, me being, I'll go first since I'm not from Texas. I'm actually from Michigan. Started doing pottery in Michigan. My sister and my brother-in-law were potters. And I never thought I was going to go into pottery. I thought I was going to have a yellow Mercedes and be a lawmaker or a lawyer, actually. But I drifted towards pottery, went to undergrad for pottery sculpture at Western Michigan University. And then it was took a couple years after school and tried to figure out where I wanted to go to graduate school. Looked at a lot of places, really love Montana. Michigan's cold, Montana's cold. I said, I'm gonna head south. UT Austin had a good program, went down and visited, had a great introduction to Austin as a city, UT as a school. Found myself here for school in 2003 for graduate. Graduated in 2007, moved back to Michigan for about 11 months, and right back to Austin.
I'm from Texas. I grew up in Houston, so just, a couple hours south. And I ended up in Austin for undergrad at UT.
And am I right in thinking that UT is one of the US's like mega universities? Isn't it gigantic, like population wise?
Yes, it's huge.
Yeah, it's big.
It's really big. We both went to the art school, so that's a much smaller community. It feels kind of separate from the overall campus.
Yeah, because I always wonder that when you go to, well, especially if you're going to go for undergrad to a major university, how you not get lost. Because I went to grad school at the University of Florida, and that was probably 50,000 maybe. And even as a grad student, I was just walking around the campus like, what in the hell is happening? Like there's so much happening in one spot. So how did y'all find your niche there?
Well, honestly, for me, it's like when they gave me a studio in the art building, maybe this wasn't the best way to go about it, but I really hardly left. I never went to a UT football game, which is a big thing. I could see it from the top floor of the art building, but I pretty much just honed in on my craft and just like stayed in the building. It's a big campus. They call it the 40 acres and it's large. So I never really made it across campus unless like there was some just sort of weird one-off thing I needed to do. So my time, was kind of spent in the building.
Yeah, undergrad was a little bit different because, you're taking a bunch of other classes like sciences and math classes that are required for the degree. So I did venture out across campus a lot. And just like you said, I was getting lost. I had to Google Maps my way to find classes, even until I was there 5 years actually. Into my 5th year, I was still using Google Maps to find my way around campus.
I think that's a good point because in graduate school, I didn't have to take math and science. So, I did have like some art history, which was like the building next door. So, yeah.
Well, when y'all met, you both had independent art careers. And then at some point, Nom Ceramics comes together. So like, how did you guys decide that collaboration was going to be the way to work?
It really did start with Eastside Pot Shop. Scott and I met through who was the sculpture technician at UT at the time. We actually physically met there at the art building, although he was no longer in school and I was just finishing up. He had just kind of conceived of the idea of Eastside Pot Shop and had just gotten the keys. He was starting to build tables. He was there at school to pick up a bunch of bricks for the kiln. And I had just finished. I didn't have anything going on. Summer break was starting. And so I was like, let me hop on and help you. We fell in love eventually. Just long story short, but the thing with Eastside Pot Shop was we were working together side by side for 6 months, testing hundreds of glazes, firing kilns, throwing, hand building and throwing to test for the shop. And that's kind of what sprouted the shared studio energy between us, which we were always really great studio mates in that way. But it took a few years before Nom really started. And it was when kind of I was doing some surface decoration on my own, on my hand-built forms, and Scott was playing around with some really thick glazes, if you want to talk about those glazes that you were doing.
Yeah, I've always been into chinos. Had a cat named Chino for 19 years. I just love the simplicity of the glaze in itself. And then, of course, the American chino and what direction that sort of went. So I was playing with chinos in kind of a poured way where I was pouring them on vessels, layer after layer, building up 9 layers where they would crawl and really pull apart. And the glaze, this one specific glaze, wasn't melting very much. So it was staying kind of proud on the surface. And so I was doing these sort of raised, proud, poured surfaces. And, Rebecca, being more of the painterly mind, she said, let me put this stuff in a bottle and see what I can draw with it. And so, all right. And so we kind of messed with the glaze a little bit. We played with the formulation, kind of made it a little bit more feldspathic, to sort of hold the viscosity that we wanted and the melt that we wanted. And Rebecca just started drawing, and it kind of blew me away. Me not being much of a sort of narrative type literal drawer, I'm more of a pattern mark maker. Um, it just inspired me, and I was just kind of blown away by what she could do with this. And it inspired me to start trying new things. And then, funny enough, it's like, what are the odds that two people have the same aesthetic and the same sort of vision? When we talked about what we wanted the work to be, the adjectives were the same, but we just had different ways of achieving those adjectives. And I think we both realized early on that, like, same, but different, and that we complemented each other and that we were stronger together, and we fed off each other and inspired each other to sort of push. And, easy peasy, Nom Ceramics was born. It wasn't, it was natural, and it just came. We never talked about it. It was never verbalized. It just happened on the kiln shelf.
And just, it was the glaze that really kind of tied us together. And it was all kind of informed by all of these other glazes that we had previously tested for the shop. So once we found that one glaze that I could draw with, which I was already doing with a bunch of our other glazes, then it was like, okay, let's just go into the shop's glaze palette and start combining all these other glazes with it. And slowly, like, we started to build our palette for Nom Ceramics based off of Eastside Pot Shop's glaze room.
I wanted to go back to something you said, Scott, about what makes that glaze work, the one that sits out from the surface. Essentially, it has the feeling of almost like you're drawing borders and then putting other glazes inside those borders. And then when it melts, some things melt together and some things almost just melt so they butt up together. But what makes that work is the one glaze that can create a boundary. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what is it about that glaze that makes that happen?
Yeah, so that's pretty much exactly it. Is that glaze, it's got a nice balance of melt, but it doesn't melt and pool. So it stays raised off the surface pretty much as far as we apply it. If you apply it too thick, you start running into other issues. But basically how our process works is it's almost like paint by number, if you will. We'll draw with that white glaze and draw outlines. Then we'll go back in with squirt bottles with other glazes and fill in. And then we go back again with the white glaze and outline a second time. So,
Okay.
in our work, we kind of want some glazes to stay put and some glazes to really run. So, it's nice, the absorbency of glaze and the quickness that it absorbs into the surface allows us with certain glazes to really apply 2 or 3 coats within those white borders. So we know they're going to break the border and they're going to run down, but they'll get stopped by the next border. So we love running, but we don't want them to just insanely run off the pot. And it's really just, the work's just gotten better the more we've been able to understand the individual glazes themselves. And for those reasons, the glaze palette has really minimized. Now we're using, it changes seasonal. We'll go into our harvest palette or our summer palette, but if we can just hone it down to 5, 6 glazes and really know the properties and the characteristics of what those glazes are going to do, I feel like that's where we can sort of make our best work. Partial control and then partial let go. That glaze it's based off of Shino, American Shino. It's a really, really basic glaze. And it's a combination of a couple feldspars, soda spar, potash spar, little nephsi, couple sprinkles of other stuff. I mean, it's simple. It's 5 ingredients, about as simple as it gets.
It's interesting because our glazing process can be somewhat intricate. You know, we come up with patterns, and over time it's gotten a lot looser. But after we apply all the glaze, then we put it into the soda kiln, which is like a whole other aspect of just kind of letting the soda take over, you know? So that kind of lends itself to those running surfaces and kind of the background of the designs getting, you know, super fluxed, or kind of also giving us an element of surprise, which I think is important for us to stay excited.
I think it's important to, you know, when we're talking about this subject, it's important to sort of talk about, I think at the core of our work is layers, is building layers of materials, information, and depth without doing it through glaze layers. You know, at our shop, everybody's searching for that new combination of multiple glazes on top of each other to get something that nobody else has. But as most of us know, you know, layering glaze after glaze can just inherently be problematic. So Rebecca and I, you know, spend a lot of time sort of developing layers of information that then get hidden and exposed throughout the multiple layers and the firing. So we'll start out, you know, laying down under glazes, flashing slip first, then under glazes over top, and then sometimes more different colors under glazes. Then we're going into glazes, sometimes slips, and trying to use as much material that's stable as possible. And a lot of the information we put down gets lost, and we're okay with that. But you know, it peeks through, and just like there's something inherent in the surface that you can feel the depth to it, even if you can't read it legibly. And I think that's an important part for both of us. It's like the story is told through layers. It doesn't always come out as the complete book, but you can feel that it's there. And for us, at least I'll speak for myself, that's really exciting for me. And, you know, a lot of this came from Rebecca's, you know, she can compose an image like a painter. You know, she sees like a watercolor artist. I'm like all hands, like square, circle, you know, and Rebecca's thinking of the pot as a circular object that then can be flattened into a piece of paper and then configured into a round vessel. And so I think a lot of the layers and the ideas of like just for making paintings, really Rebecca jumped off for that.
When y'all think about pattern, like let's say the floral pattern, there's a big globe jar in the show you have at Companion right now. And there's elements of that where you can see floral elements. Like it reminds me of Marimekko. Have you guys ever looked at that? Like the Danish design, the big floral prints. So you can really see those. Like that's a specific reference. But then there are other pots, even in that same show, where the reference is so loose that I can't tell what it is, but like you said, there's an energy to it. So how do you guys think about specificity in pattern when you're starting to build these layers? Like, how do you know when it's too specific or not specific enough?
That's a tough one. I think over time, you know, things have gotten a lot looser. When I first started to think about floral patterns, I was looking at a lot of books on, you know, floral illustration. I had books on, you know, floral design. And so just kind of flipping through pages and loosely drawing images of flowers and other floral patterns. But when I look back on the earlier work, sometimes it feels too much like it's referencing a specific flower or, you know, a specific pattern. And it's interesting because the pot you're talking about is actually from our solo show last year. And so the work just in this year has loosened up quite a bit. A lot of times it really is, as I'm drawing flowers, I'm thinking about what glaze is going to go into that spot. So, if I really want to put a big splash of rutile blue down, then I'm kind of thinking about a flower, and I love the way rutile runs. Then I'm thinking about a flower or floral shape that kind of has petals that are, drooping down over the side. And so I kind of am building patterns of floral-esque shapes with the intention of the glaze, where the glaze is going to go, like mapping out the glaze. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah.
So it's not very specific, I don't think, anymore, at least.
I think our work goes through evolutionary changes, like yearly, bi-yearly, sometimes faster. But in between those big monumental changes, I feel like we are able to build a toolbox, if you will, of images, of marks. And once we have that toolbox full, we can just take those tools out of the box and use them very intuitively and freely without thinking too much. Like the pots are never, not, I wouldn't say never, but it's very rare that we're taking out a pencil and sketching like what's going to happen. It's really like, it could even just be the music that's on that's like driving the tempo of the piece, or like it's me feeling inadequate and looking at Rebecca killing it across the table. I'm like, I better step this up, I try to draw flowers and cool stuff all the time. I just murder them. They never look good. So it's like, I'm really handy with a circle and a triangle. I think that's the cool part, is that like we take our work very seriously, but the actual making is lighthearted. It's fun, and we can try, we can fail. And, I think through that looseness and that willingness, we can learn faster. If we're really trying to like hone our craft in and really narrow it down, it's harder to stumble and be excited about it.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com.
Hey, this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply, located in Dayton, Ohio, exclusive distributor of Jen Allen templates and Put a Lid on It t-shirts. We are a proud sponsor of this episode and the Brickyard Network. Find all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs, including the largest stock of GR pottery forms, at cornellstudiosupply.com. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters, by potters.
How do y'all actually break up your days? So like when you go into the studio to start the day, are y'all both working in wet clay and then you move on to decoration? Like what's the balance of labor between the two of you?
Yes, we do usually have a phase of making work, and then we work separately in the clay stage. So, we have this shared studio. Scott throws on the wheel, I hand build. And then eventually we're ready to move into decoration mode, and we kind of clear out the, big table space and set up for glazing. But it takes a while, especially now that we have a baby in the picture. Our studio practice has been completely, chopped up. So now we just get in there as much as we can. And unless we have a big deadline, then we're really just fluid about how we work. We kind of, we have the shop, Eastside Pot Shop, which is really our job. And we don't want Nom Ceramics to feel like it's work, So we kind of try to remind ourselves, like, just make what you want to make. It would be great to have this many bowls, this many planters, this many mugs, but don't force it. Make what feels right. We'll get it bisked, and then we'll move into glazing, which is where we really come together. And we work quite slow and in pretty small batches for that reason.
the nice thing about our glazing is when we do come together, we often truly just come together because of, limited time and taking care of the baby and, trying to get in the studio. There are a lot of times where we'll pass the pot off, and, one of us will lay out a design, the other one will come in, work on it, we'll pass it back. Especially with some of the larger pieces, Rebecca makes some pretty wicked stools that are pretty large, and a glazed job on a stool might take 25 hours. So we're definitely passing it back and forth in that way. But like she said, most of the building or all of the building happens sort of separately, but not without input. We're always, asking each other to sort of look at it and talk about it. I feel like with whoever's hand it comes from, it's truly ours. It might not be my hand, but it's ours. It's Nom. That work. Rebecca has her own sculptural practice, which is truly hers outside of Nom, which is pretty amazing.
Well, you've brought in a couple things that I want to talk about. One is creative parenting, because when you have a couple and a baby, the time frame of raising a child. I have a 2-year-old, so I'm like right there with y'all. But the baby doesn't care what's going on in the studio at all. The baby has needs that are time specific. And when you have a creative couple, I think you alluded to it, but like y'all probably aren't in the studio that often together anymore, right? Because someone's got to take care of that baby. So how does it work?
Currently, we only have 10-month-olds so far. So currently, we're not in the studio that much, period, unfortunately. But for me, when our son Finley was younger, I would go in at night after we put him to bed and work kind of late as Rebecca stayed with him. And now the tables have turned a little bit since he's sleeping on his own a little bit better. We're trying to get in at night together.
As I'm sure you know, everything is kind of timed around when the baby's sleeping. So, it's just such a balance of, letting other sort of priorities go when I really feel the need to get in the studios, not looking at the kitchen that desperately needs to be cleaned and go get these ideas out, or especially if we have a deadline, the studio becomes higher up on that list of priorities. But no, we're rarely in the studio together during the day anymore. We hope to get back to that point. We're starting to feel like he can hang out with grandma a little bit longer, and because that's really where we can come together and feel best with each other, is when we're sharing the studio together.
It's going to be great when he can wedge clay. Will be ideal.
Put him to work, make him earn it.
Yeah, I mean, we have tried to set up a little baby play space in the studio, but as you know, their attention spans aren't super long, so there's not a lot you can get done.
Yeah, and I think parenting, or at least the time that parenting takes, has helped me get focused. So I try to keep my daughter out of the studio as much as possible. And I actually don't mind that, because when I'm with her, I'm with her. And when I'm not, I'm like getting shit done. As to where pre-child, I would kind of meander in the studio. No more meandering. You know what I mean? Like I'm pretty focused when I get in there, and I see you nodding your head. So
Yes.
That must be what's happening for y'all as well.
Absolutely. When I get in there, I mean, I think there's almost a little bit, it's maybe not the best, because I don't feel super free to experiment and, have failures, which is so necessary for a studio practice. I really kind of get on myself, like start something successful, make it work, make it happen. And then if something does fail, it hurts a lot more now, because it feels like time wasted.
Do you think the loosening up of pattern in the last year has coincided with your son being born?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Tell me about that. Like, why do you think that shift happened?
Some of it was just sheer amount of time some of those more complicated compositions would take. And back when we had more time in the studio, I mean, Rebecca was making some vessels that were, 3 feet tall, 2.5 feet wide. The amount of surface area, and then drawing and layering and redrawing. I mean, like I said before, is, we'd have 25, 30, 40 hours in one piece, which just not obtainable anymore. It will be again if we want to. But also we got some great feedback from people. We do a lot of shows, we do a lot of festivals in person in Texas. And, some of the best feedback we got is people that just live with our work, live with it daily, and sort of the simplicity versus the really highly sort of condensed design that has, a lot of just sort of energy in different ways. Maybe we're slightly harder to live with daily. So, some of the looser, more open pieces just allowed people to just sort of enjoy color palettes and simple patterns, rather than really diving into a full painting or composition, if you will.
Since Finn was born in our time, so much less studio time, I was more interested in really simplifying the patterns and kind of, like Scott touched on before, just thinking more about the layers of things and just being a little bit quicker with it, not overthinking. So, it would start with the underglaze where we just lay down a field of color and some flashing slip as well, then do some black line work, big circles or squares, like simple shapes, like Scott has mentioned. And then just do an overall pattern of simple daisies or, something that we already have kind of going through the body of work. And then just letting the glaze kind of take that over, thinking about a few different glazes that really act well together, that run over the surface in really interesting ways. I think sometimes I actually like that work more now, when I look at the forms. I feel like some of those more complex patterns weren't so cohesive with the form. So a lot of times things could kind of get lost, where now it feels everything is really nicely in conversation with each other. Something interesting about this more recent work, the stuff that we have at Companion now, a lot of it is wood-fired. And Scott actually kind of circled back to what he was doing right before Nom started, which was doing big Chino pours over the sides of pots, which, maybe came from us feeling like we need to fill some of this surface space, because we only have this much time, and let's think about it and make our lives a little bit easier. And then we started getting these results back, and it was just like, this is beautiful. This is like a whole new level for us. We're hiding parts of the pot and applying our white glaze on top of the Chino, and things just got even more exciting. So it was interesting how in an attempt to simplify our process, we actually had another breakthrough.
I also think on that note is like, her and I are, yeah, we do patterns, we do compositions, but we're material people and we're process people. And part of, I grew up, my sister and brother-in-law had a Nobori Gamma. I grew up firing that thing. In college, I fired primarily wood kills. And so, taking these really glazy surfaces and taking them to cone 14 in a wood kill is no longer the option. It's like that glaze does not stay on there. So, I think that was part of, for me, circling back to my 20 years ago when I was strictly Chino guy and wood firing. It's like bringing back, let's face it, Chinos are about as stable as it gets. There's no better glaze that you're going to put in a really high temperature than a Chino, in my eyes. If you're into that aesthetic, of course. So, I think again, it was a truly combination of like different periods of our artistic lives and our collaboration, all sort of culminating within the kill itself. And I think personally, it's some of our strongest, most exciting work. But, I've seen Rebecca and I get way more excited about the way a material moves than we ever had the way a drawing looks. We may not be chemists or like sort of focus on the real molecular end of it, but we love a good firing, and we love to see the way materials react to different processes. And I think that's inherent in our work, and it's important that it's inherent in our work. The other stuff is just layers.
Having someone that you collaborate with is also someone to get excited with. Like that's like one of the positive things. Like I'm sure when you're unloading a kiln and you're both going, "Whoa, that I didn't think it was going to do that," or the opposite, like that's exactly what we wanted. That shared excitement, I really miss that because I work in a studio by myself. I don't get to share that, so I think that's got to be a plus to the way y'all work.
It definitely is. And it also, we also get that from firing the kilns for the shop, for Eastside Pot Shop. We've got about 80 students, and a lot of them are really interested in soda as well. We have a handful of students who make stunning work, who have really figured out our glazes and the firing process. So a lot of times Scott is firing the soda kiln that doesn't have any of our pots in it. And we'll mention to each other like, man, I wish we had a pot in there just to like be a little more excited. But when we see our students' work come out, a lot of times we're getting really inspired by things that they're doing, and we'll look at a pot and be like, oh, there's just the way that glaze is sitting on top of that flashing slip on that texture. Like, let's take that back to our home studio and try that out.
Don't get me wrong, I love all temperatures. I love all ranges of ceramics. I love all types of kilns, but when the soda kill for us starts feeling predictable as maybe sometimes the electric kiln can feel, that's when we know we got to change. It's like get too comfortable. We open up the kiln and don't have that excitement together. We're like, yeah, this looks good. And it looks really good, but it's like, yeah, this looks good. It's like what we expected. For us as artists, I feel that's when I feel most stagnant. Like if I don't get a surprise, I don't learn something from every single onload, it's time to switch it up. Because, I think the thirst for knowledge and the thirst to take it one step farther is the driving force that keeps us going and keeps us creative.
Yeah, and going back to, the recent Shino pours that he involved in our most recent batch of work that's at Companion, that was kind of our big moment recently that reignited our practice. With the baby, things were we didn't do a lot for months, and then we decided to join in the Wood Fire, which is down at Eye of the Dog Art Center in San Marcos, Texas. It's a great community of people. We just thought this will be really fun for us. Let's do this. Let's bring the baby. And then, Scott did the Shino pours. We get it out, and it's just like fireworks going off. So exciting. And so we kind of went back to the drawing board on ways to reincorporate that. And it's just, yeah, it's that element of surprise that really will keep us going. And now involving the wood is, super, super fun.
There's a lot of technical sort of issues you have putting so much glaze on objects, and the physical interaction between the clay and glaze surface and shrinkage and the way that glazes squeeze pots. If you're really trying to make livable work, maybe some of our previous endeavors weren't the most viable, where loosening up these surfaces a little bit, giving that squeeze, if you will, a little relief, not putting so much tension on forms, has also, it's important for us to put out reliable, good, everyday functional wear, but also be decorative, also be exciting. But I feel like now we're really, really focusing on the quality, just the quality of the interaction of materials and its practicality for daily use with the baby. These things are going to have to be banged. And also thinking about just the thickness. I think it's interesting, Rebecca and I as teachers at the pot shop, is we're always talking about thickness. And, one inherent issue I see in learning ceramics is people judge their skill by how thin things can be. And, I think it's a weird way to judge where you're at. And, yeah, it's great to weigh things. Sometimes it's not great to weigh things, but there's a point for certain types of wear where things are just too thin. And, I feel like it's taken a long time to get over that and be like, think about what these objects, what their life is going to be, and let that dictate their thickness. I mean, sure, if it's a cup, you don't want it to be 20 pounds when it's full of that delicious IPA. But, you also don't want a nice little, me to be really clunky. But, if it's going to be a vase and it's got a small base, let that thing have some weight. Let it be stable. Tangent, but.
No, it's worthy. And actually, I remember I was talking to John Britt, who's a glaze guy in North Carolina, and I was talking to him about crazing on some of the soda-fired work that I was making. And I was putting 3 or 4 glazes on a pot and trailing them in, essentially making quilts on the sides of pots. And I was like, how do I get this not to craze? And he was like, you can't. Like, you can't have 4 or 5 glazes on something and expect it not to craze, because there's so much differing tension on the pot itself, and it has to release somewhere. And I thought your way of thinking about the Shino pores or like the bigger spaces, the more empty spaces, is a release. It's a visual release, but it is a tension release in the glaze surface, which, depending on what you want in terms of crazing, that's smart to make it release where you want it, as opposed to it all hell breaking loose and things are like popping off different parts, of the pot.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, crazing is something that we also have gone down a rabbit hole, and I'm happy to hear John Britt's response to your question on that. One kind of constant that we do is our liner glaze is a really stable one. So everything that goes on the inside of a functional pot, like a cup or, something people are drinking out of, we definitely want to make sure that that liner glaze is super durable and simple ingredients and, hopefully not crazed.
Yeah, we kind of went full circle. It's like back in the day, we're like, ooh, what about a green turquoise on the inside? It's like, it's much more pleasant to have just a nice creamy white or something, soft yellow maybe.
Well, I wanted to talk about the pot shop, and actually we can wrap up the interview talking about that. That's existed for quite a while. Did you say it started in 2003?
No. 2017.
Oh, 17. Okay, I was way overshooting the math there.
We're not that old.
Yeah. When you're creating a community like that, like a pottery community within a broader artistic community, because Austin is really kind of a cultural hub of that part of Texas and really that whole region. How did y'all think about creating a community there? Like, what was your thought process going into getting the keys and setting up shop?
Part of it, people always say to me, oh, you must have wanted to do this for years, I was a college professor. I didn't take to academia, wanted to open a place to still teach, still offer a place where people could learn. So that was the entry point. It was like, how do I do what I'm doing without the bureaucracy of academia? But in entering with that sort of attitude and thought process, Rebecca and I knew immediately that, and I love all types of community art studios, by the way, but we knew that we wanted it to be academic. We wanted it to be technical. We wanted it to be less Instagram photos and more just banging pots coming out of complicated processes. And part of what we say to everybody that comes to our shop is, hey, your stuff's gonna suck for the first 2 months, like just make a bunch of stuff and glaze it because it's gonna be bad. But in starting that way, it starts certain individuals, it starts their quest and thirst for sort of to wrap their heads around this thing of ceramics. And it's such a big subject. Is our scope at the pot shop is pretty narrow. We focus mostly on high fire. Sure, we'll do some mid fire and a little bit of low fire, but we just wanted to create a place that people that wanted to take it more seriously could have a place to go. And we try to teach everybody like they're going to do it for the rest of their life. So we give a lot of information, and sometimes they want it, sometimes they don't. But that's at least at the core of our philosophy is we're teaching people a craft in such a way that they could make a career out of it.
Being in Austin, like you said, it's a cultural hub. There's so much going on here. It's a tech hub also. We have so many different types of people from all walks of life, working all sorts of careers, lots of tech people, people in the film industry here, lots of freelancers. We also have some professional, artists who their career is making fine art. So it's really interesting to see everybody's different approach to ceramics and kind of the processes that they can do at our studio. Like I said before, we have a handful of students, more than a handful really, who take it very seriously and have really found their own niche in ceramics. I think that's something that's really important to us, is to help individuals find their voice in clay and to be unique from the studio, even, from the person working at the table next to them. One thing Scott and I really love is that when we go to unload kilns, or even to go look at the shelf of pots that have already been unloaded, one thing that we really value is we can pick up a pot and we know whose it is, especially those folks who have been with us for quite a while. It's pretty amazing to see how someone from the tech industry and someone from film and an artist here can make work that is so different while all using the same glazes coming out of the same kilns. It's amazing.
I think that's also like an interesting, because Austin is so creative as well as diverse. I always thought in my life, like the most interesting art I've ever come across was people that started in a different industry. Like I wanted to be an artist from like high school, but people that were into biology and then all of a sudden became artists, like they create this art that's so unique. And that happens a lot at our shop, people that are mechanical engineers. Like what type of work does that person make, versus somebody that's a lawyer. It's really cool to see like all these people with their own stories like come within our walls and like interpret them on clay. It's truly incredible.
One of our favorites was a friend who, and a lot of these people become our close friends over time, but our friend John, who is a pediatric spinal surgeon, he would come in after surgery, put a 10-pound block of clay on the wheel and center it with one hand.
And he could throw with the wheel barely spinning and be so slow up the wall because he was a surgeon. He's the only guy I know that could be that even and steady. But like, John, speed the wheel up, man. You're going to have uneven lips. He's like, I got it.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to talk about timing. When y'all opened the shop, 2017, Austin was cheaper. So if you tried to open that shop today, 2024, the initial rent would have been tough. So how do you think about a city changing around you? Because I really think y'all hit the sweet spot where I'm sure it was not cheap in 2017, but a lot cheaper than it is today.
Long story short is, I've been doing clay in Austin for 25 years and 20 some years. And had a great relationship with the clay supplier, Armadillo Clay, which is the biggest clay supplier in all of Texas. And I had lost my studio. My studio building was sold and they were going to make a giant apartment or a hotel there, which they still haven't built, of course. It's been a vacant lot forever. And one day I went into Armadillo Clay and they said, oh, I heard you lost your studio. It's like, they were like, do you want to rent the place next door? And I said, man, I can't afford it, and then Eureka, thought about building a community art studio. And so, they're we couldn't do this without them. every day they're part of our business and our lives, and helping us just maintain equipment. We've got materials 100 yards away. We can just grab a bag of spodumene if you can afford it. That sort of thing. I'll let Rebecca talk about the current state of things, but I can't say enough is like tapping into the clay community and the people that love clay. Clay people are the best, some of the most kind people around. And, through the love of clay, people will help, and they'll help get space, and they'll help make things work. I always say, the cool thing about clay versus some other sports like sculpture on the large scale is we all start with the same thing. It's just clay. It's not like, oh, I can afford this fancy metal that I make my sculptures with. It's like we all start on the ground level, and I think that ties us all together. It's a pretty sweet thing.
Yeah, we definitely couldn't, we wouldn't be the same space without Armadillo Clay. They're a huge part of our whole ethos. And I think it's a really mutual relationship. They say the same thing about us, I think. But when we opened, you're right, it was a really sweet spot. There wasn't a ton of clay studio spaces. There were a handful of other studios. Since that time, pottery studios have popped up all over town, and luckily there's still enough demand to go around, and everybody's filling spots. And on that note, that's just where we kind of stay focused on what our original sort of goal was for Eastside Pot Shop, is to be that space that's maybe where people go when they want to really get serious about ceramics and find their voice with clay. So we've just kind of had to maintain our integrity through the growing city. And, we're a small studio. We're not as big as some of the other ones around us, but we're unique.
And I was going to say, I think today in the real estate market of Austin is if you want to open a studio, it's a numbers game. You have to have really large studios with a lot of people, participants, which also can lend itself to having less space per student and less studio time for the students to grow. So thank God they're there, but we see a lot of the new studios catering to more beginners, people that want to get into it, because inherently there's more beginners than experienced ceramicists in any given location. So our studio has become more of an intermediate advanced studio. And so a lot of people do take classes elsewhere and then they come to us. And we're really proud of the fact that we have a mom and pop feel. We're small. Our faces are there. Everybody knows us. We know them. And I think that sort of thing is harder and harder to do in Austin today. Is how do you be mom and pop when prices are outrageous? Yeah, you're right. We got in the sweet spot. Probably couldn't be repeated today.
To wrap up, can y'all plug the show you have at Companion as well as your social media so people could get in touch if they want to?
We do an annual solo show with Companion Gallery. Our show opened last Friday online. We sent a handful, about 50 or so, wood-fired and soda-fired pieces. We also do several of their sort of group theme shows every year. We have social media. Primarily, we're found at Instagram at Nom Ceramics. I'm at Scott Pots, and she's at Rebecca Proctor, and at Eastside Pot Shop. And our Eastside Pot Shop is just eastsidepotshop.com. If you're in Austin, stop in and visit us. We have a really nice spot to come hang out in. Come say hi.
Well, thanks so much, y'all. It was a real pleasure to spend some time with you today.
Yeah, Ben, thanks so much for inviting us. This was really wonderful.
It really was. Thanks so much.
I'd I'd like to thank Rebecca and Scott for doing this interview, as well as their parents who are taking care of the baby. What would we all do without the loved ones that take care of the children? They are essential to the podcast and the ceramic process. Before we go, I'd like to thank today's sponsors. That's the 28th Annual Bray Benefit Auction, which is happening this week, July the 19th through the 26th. If you'd like to put in a bid, you can find out more about that by going to archiebray.org. I'd also like to thank the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art for their longtime sponsorship. We couldn't make the network without them. If you or your organization would like to be a sponsor on our network, you can get in touch at brickyardnetwork.org. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.